Hello, and welcome to our California Assembly District 15 Candidates Forum, hosted by the brand new and mighty Albany Democratic Club.
My name is Jennifer Radics-Johnson. I'm the current president of the Albany Democratic Club. I want to thank you all for being here this evening. We're here to inform and we're here to educate. And so this event tonight is part of who we are and what we do as the Albany Democratic Club to keep you all informed as residents of Assembly District 15, to learn about your candidates and to make an informed choice. So I thank you all for taking the initiative to come out tonight to learn more about these candidates and to make an informed choice. If you are interested in joining the Albany Democratic Club, please visit our website at albanydemocraticclub.org. We also have some membership forms up front, but I don't want to take any more time because I do want to turn it over to the candidates. So thank you all for being here, and we hope you join the Albany Democratic Club.
So I'm Laura Feinstein. I am an at-large officer with Albany Democratic Club. So let's go ahead and get started. So first up, we have Owen Poindexter. He is a writer and activist who lives in our neighboring city of Berkeley. And the first thing we want to hear from Owen is, if elected, what top 3 issues will you work on in your first term?
Hey everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you to the Albany Democratic Club and to all of you for being informed, active voters. So I've been fighting to elect progressive candidates and to forward progressive causes for 10 years now, and I believe that progressives need to do more. I think in a lot of ways we are living our values, and in other ways we're failing. And I would point toward campaign finance reform as one issue, and climate change is another, where we're not doing enough. But where I'm focused right now is income inequality. We have 20% of Californians are in poverty right now, in one of the richest places in the world. Another 20% are near poverty, which is not a whole lot better. So we should be ensuring a basic standard of living right now. And right now, the floor for anyone in California is the street. It's having nothing and having no home at all and having no access to health care. And that's unconscionable in a place as supposedly progressive and prosperous as we are. So what are my 3 priorities? Well, first of all, single-payer health care. Your ability to access health care and to get the treatment you need should not be dependent on your wealth and your income. Secondly, affordable housing. Everyone knows we have a housing crisis here. We have to get serious about it. We have to have radical action that means both protecting renters and homeowners and also making sure that people are able to stay in their homes, and we radically increase supply. And third, and actually this is my big one, this is what everyone knows me for, is basic income. We should have a universal basic income in California to ensure that every single person, no matter who you are, where you're from, what your situation is, you are taken care of. If we had a basic income here, no one in California would go hungry. So think about that. We'd have a radical ongoing economic stimulus. We'd have an economy unlike any others. So we can do more to then just fight the battles of the previous generation. And we do have to fight those because they're not over. But we can have the California we want. Thank you.
Next is Javanka with the same question for everybody now, the 3 top priorities.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see so many young people in the audience paying attention to what's going on in their world and in their district. So my 3 top priorities, as it has been for the last 7 years that I've been on the Richmond City Council, has been and continues to be economic, environmental, and social justice. And that's the easy answer. So now if I elaborate a little bit more, where we talk about economic justice, we're seeing right now the largest transfer of wealth to the 1% than we've ever seen in the entire history of the planet. And that transfer of wealth is not being shared with us. So we need to be able to have economic justice, and in that I mean people need a way to pay for basic needs, basic necessities, food, shelter, right? A way to get to school, a way to get to work, etc. So that's why in Richmond we raised the minimum wage. And our minimum wage will go up to $15 an hour by next year. That's long ahead of the state. The state goes up long after that. But as your next assembly member, I will work on making sure that we move that date up and that we have people are able to afford to live where they to work, to have the basic necessities. Environmental justice, we need to end fracking. It's killing our planet. We also need, and then when I mention social justice, I'm talking about criminal justice reform. Because we see a disproportionate number of Black and brown people being incarcerated for the same things that our white brothers and sisters are getting either a slap on the wrist or sent to drug rehab. And then lastly, of course, last but certainly not least, is healthcare reform. Everyone deserves quality healthcare. Everyone deserves to have healthcare, and no one should go broke or go into bankruptcy trying to pay for basic needs such as life-saving healthcare. Thank you.
And next is Buffy Wicks, who was a high-level campaign organizer with the Obama campaign.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I have to say, my priorities are really shaped from my own personal experience. You know, I grew up in a very working class community in a trailer, actually, and humble upbringing, and I went to good public schools, and I went to the California community college system, so I really had a ladder up. So I value my experience and what I learned from those roots. I've worked in progressive politics for about 20 years. I was an anti-war organizer in 2003, organizing against the Iraq War. I organized for Howard Dean's presidential campaign. I organized for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, for Walmart, and I spent about 6 years working for President Obama. I'm running because I believe we have the ability to actually pass bold progressive policy that actually helps people. And I've done this. I helped pass the Affordable Care Act for President Obama. So the things that I really care about, one is education. We have major racial inequities that exist within our education system here in California. 1 in 4 kids goes hungry. We are 47th out of 50th in standard of living for our children. We need to pay our teachers more. We need to provide more coaching, professional development, and invest in our schools. I'm running because I care a lot about housing. As someone who grew up in a trailer and then was a renter for 20 years, I was evicted when my apartment building got converted to condos and sold for a lot much more than someone like me could pay when I was in my 20s. We need to build more homes, and we need to guard against displacement and protect our renters and make sure we keep the diversity within our communities here. It's very critical. Healthcare. I care a lot about healthcare. I got involved in politics because one of my closest friends got diagnosed with HIV and didn't have health insurance. Everyone deserves healthcare in this country. It is a basic human right. It is what I care about and it is what I will fight for in Sacramento. We also need to reform Prop 13 on the commercial property side so we can pay for all these great things. I think I have the ability to go to Sacramento and not only vote the right way, but fight the right way and lead the right way. And I'm backed by Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and a bunch of other great local elected officials here in the district and all across this state. Thank you.
Next is Andy Katz. He is a director with East Bay Municipal Utility District.
Hi, good evening, Albany Democratic Club. Hi, I'm Andy Katz. I'm a member of the East Bay Mud Board of Directors. It's been a pleasure to represent the city of Albany, Berkeley, and surrounding cities for the last 12 years. I'm also a workers' rights attorney, and I fight every day for people who've been impacted by workplace discrimination, wage theft, health insurance denials. And for the last 20 years that I've lived here in the East Bay, I've been fighting for tenants' rights to safe and affordable housing, to having a clean environment, ensuring that we could protect our open space in eastern Alameda County, and protecting our shoreline to create the East Shore State Park. And so these experiences of fighting for social justice, fighting for workers' rights, fighting for access to health care and a clean and safe environment are what bring me to run for the Assembly here today. And my top priority, I'd say, is to ensure that we are taking bold action to protect our climate. The time is running out to be able to do what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and California is leading the way, but we must continue to do more. Right now, California has been leading the charge in having about half of our renewable energy or half of our electricity come from renewable sources by 2020, but that's not soon enough. We need to ensure that we are going bigger and bolder and that we have laws on the books that get us to 100% renewable energy and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to what scientists are telling us is what we need to do to stabilize our climate. That's a top reason why I'm running. I'm running because we need to have universal health care. We need to be able to have ideally single-payer health care that reduces health care costs, ensures that nobody ever has to choose between paying the bills and getting access to medically necessary care. We also need to be fixing our state budget to make sure that we're no longer at the bottom of the country in per pupil spending, that teachers are supported in a professional career, and that kids have real after-school programs that are fully funded, and that we're able to provide that high-quality education for our young people to be able to thrive in today's economy. Lastly, I want to make sure that we strengthen workers' rights protections. Wage theft is a real problem out there. Health insurance denials are real. The system for workplace injuries is a real big mess. And there's a lot of problems where I see out in the streets who the law is working for and who's slipping through the cracks. And that's what I'm going to do when I get to Sacramento.
Next we have Rochelle Pardue-Okamoto. She's the Mayor Pro Tem of El Cerrito.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rochelle Pardue-Okamoto. I live in the neighboring city of El Cerrito. We come to Albany often. My 4-year-old likes to call this Turkey Town because of all the little turkeys that roll around here. It's been an honor to serve on the El Cerrito City Council. We're doing great things there. We are working on improving our parks. We have extended our library hours. We have, in 2016, I headed up a Stop Hate campaign. You'll see our signs all around El Cerrito. It says "Not in Our Town." That was started by me, the NAACP, and the Human Relations Commission. Also, my most recent accomplishment on the El Cerrito City Council was to put forward some funding to look into how the closure of Alta Bates Hospital will affect our community, Albany. We partner with Albany and Berkeley and all of West County and how that will affect us all. I came from sort of a disadvantaged background, and so it's a real honor for me to sit here as a council member. It's an honor because of people like you, people that helped out with their tax money. I got Cal grants and Pell grants and was able to go to college. So one of my priorities is education. I think that it's an absolute shame that communities like ours have to tax ourselves and do all these fundraisers. I mean, I like eating out at the local restaurant as much as you do, but we shouldn't have to do that to fund our schools. Our schools should be funded by the state. I also believe in universal health care. I've been serving as a nurse at Alta Bates Hospital for the last 17 years. And so one of my biggest priorities will be putting forward single-payer health care. I'm a big proponent of SB 562, and there will be a rally in Sacramento on the 7th if you want to come and join us in putting that forward as well. I also believe in social justice issues, and I believe that we shouldn't have 1 out of 3 black men locked up. And as a mother of 2 boys, I want to go to Sacramento to fight to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. Thank you.
Next is Cheryl Sedeth. She is a principal consultant, contracts and compliance, and chief negotiator with M2E2 Consulting, and she's a resident of our city, Albany.
Good evening. Buenas noches. So my focus is a little bit different. You know, we do a lot of talking lately since this new president was elected about resisting, and I take a different approach because I believe in not just resisting, but insisting and persisting. Because I have 2 young men and a little young woman who look like me. And resisting is not something I'm going to teach them, because resisting can put them on the wrong end of the law enforcement. I have to teach them to persist and insist. So what I fight for is social justice, whether that's on the Racial Justice Coalition, the ACLU, or right here in Albany, as part of Albany coming together. I've spent the last 25 years on the professional end as a senior contracts negotiator and a federal compliance officer, working on the federal level, the state level, and the local level, negotiating with 3 of the multicultural and multi-divisional companies, and Sony, and Siebel, and Goodwill, multinational deals worth $500 million each. I've spent the last 25 years working here and these communities, ranging from Oakland all the way to Hercules, that encompass this district, working on issues that deal in education and environmental justice, whether that's with the Sierra Club or right here on grassroots level, making sure that our water is safe for in marginalized communities, which is not. We don't have to go to Flint, Michigan. We can go right here in Oakland Unified School District, where they turned off water fountains because our children water was tainted with lead. I work here in this community, making sure that we have equal pay and paid benefits, not minimum wage, because paying people at a certain wage but not having jobs available is still not acceptable. Those are the 3 things that we're going to be working for when Cheryl is your new assembly person. Thank you.
Next is Ben Bartlett. He is a member of the Berkeley City Council and lives in Berkeley.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for coming out here tonight. My name is Ben Bartlett, and I am running for assembly because everyone in East Bay deserves a home. And that's not just a slogan. It's a reality that I know from experience. You see, my grandfather was the first black realtor in Northern California. And on the day that his business partner and good friend, Byron Rumford, whose seat this was, passed the Fair Housing Act, at the celebration in his office in Berkeley, someone threw a brick through the window. Now, growing up, that brick sat in my living room on a mantle as a reminder of what we have to overcome. And so now we're still overcoming. Only now it's homelessness, and it's poverty, it's environmental degradation, it's a rapid and full spectrum disinvestment from public life, from education to healthcare to housing. And those are my 3 priorities, by the way. In order to solve them, it's going to take someone to take this seat who has a deep conviction, vision, and courage. So I'm a 5th generation native from a long line of freedom fighters from this very community, and son of a Black Panther. I've been an activist for 20 years, my whole adult life. I've done everything from free soldier children in Africa to ban plastic bags and save libraries. And now in City Council in Berkeley, in addition to being I'm an environmental lawyer too, I must say, and I work to get green jobs all over the country. And on City Council in Berkeley, I've authored more than 30 laws, including first in the country to divest from Trump's border wall, streamline affordable housing, paid family leave after 35 years of effort, and advancing and creating a new form of housing, prefabricated microunits for the homeless. So these issues are fundamental to a livable society. And right now, we are in danger of a rapid and thorough divide. It's a new divide. They're saying that in 35 years, a next generation of people, a majority of us will have a net worth of $0 and an 85% illiteracy rate. So right now, we got to come together and take that brick I mentioned and make it the cornerstone of a new edifice of many rooms, because every one of us deserves opportunity and dignity, and everyone deserves a home. Thank you.
Next up is Dan Kalb. Dan Kalb is a member of the Oakland City Council.
First of all, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to care about who you vote for and what happens in our state and our community. I'm running on my experience, my proven effectiveness, and my environmental expertise. We all say big good things, and we all have some experience doing some good things, but who is the person who can get those things done in Sacramento? Who has the strongest record to run on? And who has the experience in Sacramento on state legislation? I think that's me. Let me give you some examples. I used to work for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'm going to make climate change, environmental stewardship, environmental justice, and clean energy my top priority. Right now, of the 55 Democrats in the state assembly, guess how many actually truly come from, have a deep background in the environmental community? The answer is 0. And we have to change that. And I'm going to be the person to change that. So environmental stewardship, environmental justice, clean energy, climate change. I've worked on those issues for much of my adult life. I'm going to be a leader in Sacramento on those issues. I know how to get things done in Sacramento, and I have a proven record both in Sacramento and in Oakland. For example, in Oakland, I took the lead in stopping the coal terminal from being built in Oakland, and so far we're still succeeding. We're being sued, but we're really pushing hard to make that happen. I'm very proud of that accomplishment. Have many more environmental accomplishments throughout my history. Second, government reform. Clean money elections. I'm going to take up the mantle and push for clean money elections throughout our state. It's time is long overdue for us to squelch the special interests and have clean money elections, public financing for the state. If we care about getting good reforms done in all sorts of areas, clean money elections is an essential part of making that happen. Prop 13 reform, also government reform. If we care about financing the important things we want to do, we need to change the commercial side of Prop 13 so large companies, large corporations pay their fair share. Right now, they don't. And finally, public education. I have a background in working on public education issues in Oakland. Even though we have a separate school board, I decided to create a joint partnership, and through the phone calls I made and the efforts I put in, we started a partnership to reduce truancy and chronic absenteeism in Oakland. We need universal preschool. We need to reduce tuition for community colleges and public universities in California, and we need to fund those things. I'm going to push those things hard. I know how to get them done in Sacramento, and I'd appreciate your support.
Last but not least is Judy Apple. She is a trustee with the Berkeley School Board.
Hi, I'm Judy Appel. Are there any cougars in the house? That's right. And I'm really glad you're here because, I don't know, I had one of those days today that was really sad. I was just feeling very discouraged and angry, actually, by the undermining of our democracy in this country. And then to come here and see all of you and all of you young people here really kind of injects me with hope. I'm running for state assembly because we have a job to do. I have been working for the last 25 years with and for the people of this district in California on the issues that are most important to this state. Things like homelessness and housing, criminal justice reform as one of the founding members of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and at the Drug Policy Alliance. I've worked with the LGBTQ community as a leader helping to bring marriage equality and equity for all families. I've worked for the last 6 years on the Berkeley School Board helping to level the playing field for our students. And it's the energy that I've brought to all of this, the deep embedded commitment to tackling the systemic racism and injustice that is embedded in our society. That is why I'm running. I'm going to take the experience that I have to deal with many different issues, but together, and I want to say not just me, but we, because I am a collaborator, and we will together help level the playing field and create fair opportunity for working families. We need to have access to housing. We need to build more housing and create opportunities for people to access that housing. We have to create jobs and good jobs and new jobs so that people can access that housing. Second of all, we need to reform the criminal justice system. We have got to absolutely end the school to prison pipeline that is leading our children and predominantly our kids of color into the criminal justice system. And finally, I am the public school candidate, and I am committed to reinvest in our public schools so we are no longer the 42nd in per pupil spending, but we become the first once again. That is why the California Teachers Association, the California Federation of Teachers, many other teachers unions, Lonnie Hancock, Van Jones, and many, many others have supported me. And I want to ask all of you to join Team Judy and support my candidacy.
So these questions I'm going to ask are selected from a number of questions that were submitted by people in the community in advance of tonight. Our first question is about healthcare. Alta Bates is the closest major hospital for much of Assembly District 15, but Sutter plans to close it by 2030. What's your proposal for what we can do after the departure, or to potentially in face of the departure of Alta Bates Hospital?
Well, just hearing that question really, saddens me greatly, because every community deserves a functioning hospital. That's why when they were considering, and it's now closed, unfortunately, considering closing Doctors Hospital, I was one of those folks there rallying and protesting its closure, because I recognize that if we don't have, as community members, if we don't have life-saving opportunities, so if we don't have a hospital within life-saving distance, then people are going to die. People have already died, unfortunately, because we don't have doctors. And now the next closest hospital is being threatened with closure, and that's wrong. And that's why it's so important that when we hear about these types of injustice in our community, it's so important to show up. As Councilmember Purdue Okimoto mentioned, there's a forum coming up this Saturday, so please attend. In the meantime, what I am doing is collaborating with the city of Berkeley, because Alta Bates is in Berkeley right now, and collaborating with the student unions in Berkeley to figure out how we can keep Alta Bates open. I don't know what it's going to take right now, but I know that what it does take at the state level is political will. You know, we have to create the kinds of laws that don't allow these type of injustice to happen in our community. If Alta Bates close, where are people gonna go? It's gonna be miles and miles away. In fact, one of the things, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to look. I'm sorry, I'm looking around, except at the timekeeper. Pardon me. But we have to create the political will to make sure that all communities have a hospital.
Am I answering the same question or different?
Same question. Everybody's going to
great.
answer.
We're all
about
answering the
Alta
same
Bates.
question. Okay, cool. So my daughter was born in Alta Bates, and I actually had a pretty complicated birth. I have a lot of warm feelings around Alta Bates, and so that drives a lot of my thinking. But more than that, it's really frightening to me that we have such lack of hospital facilities here in our region. And if folks are trying to travel even 2 or 3 miles during rush hour traffic in this community, that could take half an hour to go. And if someone's life's in danger, we might not have a half an hour. So I think we need far more regulatory control around how our hospitals are shut down. Nancy Skidder wrote a bill that would require the AG to weigh in on shutting down hospitals. I support that bill. I think that was important. The governor, as I understand, did not sign it. But we need some more regulatory control because hospitals are a public good, fundamentally. And so we need to make sure that we have access to those. We also need a complete health reform as well to make sure that we're providing more access. But it's going to require bringing all stakeholders together, from nurses and doctors to hospitals, administrators to public policy leaders, to make sure that we have the resources that we need to get more hospital care in the region.
I was on the Zoning Adjustments Board in Berkeley when Alta Bates asked for an expansion of their emergency room, and I was glad to work with them and the neighborhood to make that happen, because we need to have a hospital in our area. We need to have a hospital within a few miles to be able to save our lives when we're facing a heart attack or a stroke or an asthma episode or obstetric childbirth complications. That's why when Alta Bates announced what they were planning on doing, I got to work and I researched the epidemiology around what happens in emergency medicine when we lose hospitals in a community. The average American lives just about 2.5 to 3 miles from a hospital. And that's why Mayor Jesse Arreguín appointed me to the Community Health Commission and asked me to lead the work on the Mayor's Regional Housing Task Force to make sure that we brought together the information. We're taking the study that I initiated and get to have a full-blown health impact assessment to quantify all of the impacts that we know are going to happen based on the science when this closes. When push comes to shove, we need to rally the public support when we see those health impacts, but also show our commitment to make sure that we will not lose our hospital no matter what it takes, even if the public sector needs to get together and have our own public hospital.
Alta Bates does not have to close down. And the fact that they're selling that to our community is wrong. They can absolutely keep their doors open, and that's why we were having the forum this coming Saturday, so that we can weigh in and put pressure on them. Now, the Nurses Association, which I'm a part of, has kept open Sutter facilities before. San Leandro Hospital was transferred over to the county. St. Luke's Hospital was kept open. They wanted to close that one, they kept that one open. Santa Rosa Hospital, it was also kept open, and it was all kept open because the community pushed back. So we need all of you. We need each and every one of you to put a sign in your front yard, to call the CEO, to show up to the forums and let them know that you are not accepting them closing this hospital. I also believe that we need regulation in Sacramento. It is true. We need to go after their nonprofit status. If they want to move everything from Alta Bates into Oakland so that they can make more profits, we need to make sure that there's a cap on the kind of profits that a non-for-profit hospital can make and a cap on CEO pay, because more than 20 of their executives make more than $1 million a year.
There's a reason that Alta Bates is allowed to close, the same as Doctors Hospital was allowed to close. Because it primarily serves whom? And it primarily forces a medical desert servicing marginalized communities. Again, Rochelle is correct. However, the legislation needs to go further. It needs to say that counties are responsible for ensuring that medical facilities have to be mandated in areas to provide services within X number of miles for every marginalized community. No ifs, ands, or buts. They must provide a community hospital, including trauma services, within 5 to 10 miles of every community. Why? And it's not just the miles, it's the minutes. Because if you cannot get to trauma services within those 10 minutes, you're gonna be dead. And that is why it is very important that it be mandated from a legislative standpoint. You cannot leave it up to the hospitals themselves to police themselves, whether they're for-profit or non-profit. That is why it has to take political courage, and it has to come from somebody who's willing to fight the fight. Thank you.
So I think pretty much everyone I know in my family, my friends, have had a near-death encounter that was saved at that hospital, including myself. The scar on my hand here, I got washing dishes, and I look at it every day. I'm reminded of that emergency room and how it saved my finger. Now, I'm in the city council in Berkeley, and I can tell you that the mayor and I are in deep back-channel negotiations with this company to keep them in Berkeley. And without going further, I want you to know that I'm committed to ensuring that result. And hopefully that can happen very soon. Now, the issue with the deserts we talked about, the healthcare deserts, the equity part, how this goes into this deep disinvestment in public life, that's going to be corrected. Because Sutter will tell you they're moving due to costs. We can't afford to do this anymore. It doesn't make sense to be here. We can't afford it. Because the mechanisms that fund healthcare have been turned upside down. So I'm authoring legislation now in Berkeley to create a health innovation zone as a means of demonstrating new forms of healthcare delivery, and also to create competition to kind of move the ball forward with that company. Because it's too important. We have too many seniors, too many low-income people that depend on care, and you know our population is exploding. So coming across town to that one hospital is not going to do it. We've got to get more new hospitals all over the region, mandated by law, and overturn that permissive geographic law that they're using to close it. Thank you.
Good. Clap for him. That was good. Very important question. Thank you. My mother used to live, before she passed away a few years ago, she lived in San Pablo, just a couple blocks from Doctors Hospital. So I know firsthand the importance of having hospitals nearby, and I fought the early battles to keep that hospital open. And unfortunately, eventually that lost, and now that one is closed down. We're not going to let it happen for Alta Bates. The CEO or president of Sutter Alta Bates came in to meet with me, it must have been over a year ago, thinking that, oh, we're Oakland, they're going to move their things to Oakland, and so we should like that. And so they came in thinking they're going to be able to say, oh, we should support this. And I said, you've got to be kidding. And he started rattling off some ridiculous statistics, and I fought back on almost all those statistics, saying, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, that doesn't make sense, and here's why. And I pointed out why at least half their arguments were just bogus. So you need someone who's not just going to say no, but is going to be able to fight back and explain why no is why it should not be moved. I also authored the resolution at the Oakland City Council to oppose the closing, and that I also lobbied on Nancy Skinner's bill and testified and spoke at a press conference in favor of it. Unfortunately, got vetoed. Let's put that bill in one more time. We have to have that bill to move us forward and stop the closure. Thank you.
So, like so many people here, I spend a lot of time at Alta Bates. I spend a lot of time in the emergency room with family members. I have a lot of seniors that we care for. I'm a sandwich generation. We spend a lot of time upstairs when people are admitted. And so for us in Berkeley, of course, Alta Bates is really important. But I'm most concerned about Alta Bates because of the people in West County. Because with doctors closing, it creates this huge health deserts. Now, a lot of times I've done work, I used to work at the California School-Based Health Alliance, and we talk a lot about health deserts in places like San Bernardino or the Inland Empire. But there are health deserts right here, and the profit-driven health industry is creating more health deserts. So I really, I agree that we need to have more regulations, particularly on nonprofit hospitals, to make sure that they are accountable to the people that they're supposed to be serving. I think that Alta Bates, we need to keep Alta Bates open, and if Alta Bates can't be kept open as a part of Sutter, then we have to make it public and make sure that it's accessible to the people in our community. We don't need to be cutting down on healthcare accessibility. We need to be increasing it, and that's why we need to move towards a single-payer healthcare system where it's not profits driving healthcare, but the basic premise that healthcare is a human right.
So when we talk about universal health care, included in that idea has to be access to care. Usually we think about how we're paying for it and who has the right to health care. But if you have to drive 10 miles to your hospital or 20 miles or more, you don't have health care in the way someone who's got it right next door. And so that should be included in the single-payer healthcare legislation that we are going to pass one of these days. It's going to happen in California, and a provision addressing health deserts needs to be in there. Now, in terms of Sutter, the solution either needs to be that it becomes a public hospital and it's under the control of all of us, or something that brings Sutter on board. I used to commute past Sutter every day, and can't tell you how many times I honked my horn to cheer on the nurses, but it's been an ongoing thing where Sutter threatens to close, and there are loads and loads of protests, and this is not sustainable. So we need to either have something that is going to keep Sutter there, or it's not going to be Sutter anymore, but there has to be a hospital right there.
Our next question is about Proposition 13. Passed 40 years ago, many people say it's due for an update. What is your vision for Proposition 13 reform?
I've had over 70 house parties for my campaign across this district, many different living rooms, and I have this conversation every single night in those house parties because I think it's very, very critical. So people used to move to California to raise their kids so they could go to the good public schools here. But in 1978, when we passed Prop 13, all of a sudden the funding started to go down. We're now 46 out of 50th in per pupil spending for our kids. So our kids are being robbed because of Prop 13. We have to close the commercial property loophole. Right now, the Chevron oil refinery pays pennies of tax. They should be paying $100 million a year. Disney, Transamerica, these companies can afford to pay these taxes. They need to pay these taxes. If we closed the commercial property loophole, we would have $11.4 billion into our budgets in California, much of which could go to our education funding. So I'm a big proponent of closing this. It requires leadership in Sacramento, people talking about it. It looks like it's going to be on the ballot this year in 2018. So we need strong grassroots effort, folks from all across this state who are fed up, who are ready to make corporations pay their fair share, is what they should be paying. It's what they're paying in any other part of this country, so that we can support our schools and support things like healthcare, transportation funding, more affordable housing. It's unconscionable to me that these corporations get this break, and we need to close that corporate loophole.
I 100% agree with the premise that we need to fix our state budget. Firstly, by closing the corporate property tax loophole that's a part of Proposition 13. We have the Beverly Hills Hotel, the Chevron Refinery, all of these examples of commercial property where they can be owned by a corporate person that holds that commercial property decades and decades and decades, and they never have to have that property reassessed. Whereas ordinary individual taxpayers own a home, and your home may sell. It will turn over every 5 or 10 or so years. So the burden of residential property taxpayers has been overwhelmed by having to keep up as the commercial burden has gone down. We need to close this loophole so that we can fund our schools, fund our city and local services. And I won't just stop there. I want to make sure that we can raise revenue at the state level without having to do a 2/3 vote. I want to make sure that we close other corporate loopholes in the tax system in our state. And so we need to do much more than just the $8 to $10 billion that Prop 13 commercial reform will do. We need to go further.
If you look at a chart of Prop 13 and then how the California schools have gone, they definitely correlate. You see that funding missing. So I completely agree that we need to reform Prop 13, at the very least, starting with our corporations, like mentioned, Disney, Chevron, Bank of America. You can go on and on, all these corporations that are not paying or paying what they paid in the 70s, and that's ridiculous. We need to do more for our kids. We need to start them off with a better foundation. We need to make college affordable, and I think closing the Prop 13 loophole is the beginning of that. I'm very much in favor of universal preschool. I know my family has spent an unbelievable amount of money on preschool, and I have no idea how the poor are able to send their kids to preschool, and the fact is that they're not. And then those kids start behind, and then that starts a whole slew of problems for that child in the future. So Prop 13 is the very beginning of the reforms that we need to make to fund our educational system.
Reforming Prop 13 is I think everybody's going to say yes, but I'm going to tell you, it's not the silver bullet. It's not unlimited funds. It's going to be great if you can get it to pass. I'm going to tell you a story. If I ask you to borrow $1,000 and you say yes, the first thing you're going to say is, okay, Cheryl, when are you going to pay me back? And I'm going to say, I'm going to pay you back when I get my tax refund. And you're going to say, okay, Cheryl, when is that? I'm going to say, oh, I don't know, May, somewhere around there. And then you're going to say, okay, but what if I don't get my tax refund in May? I owe back child support or lien on my student loans or something. When are you going to get your money back? Never. That's what reforming Prop 13 looks like. If the voters say no, when are we going to get that money for the schools? Never. So what I say is, put it in the budget. Your budget reflects your values. If you want money for the schools, put it in the budget from the get-go. Yes, we should go after Prop 13 reform. Yes, we should want those monies. But in the meanwhile, put it in the budget from the get-go. We want that money from Prop 13, but I wouldn't count on it from the very beginning.
Well, yes, I certainly do support and wholeheartedly endorse the effort to bifurcate the corporate ownership from the residential homeowners and, repeal that half of Prop 13, without a doubt. I think it's very important. And the context we're talking about this is in the context of Reaganism. This is the overarching disinvestment protocol set in motion by that governor and then president, and now our current president is taking to the next level. So this is really a moment of maturation on the part of we here, us Californians, declaring that our vision of humanity is the appropriate vision, where we fund our people, we fund our activities, we fund our schools. So we've got to get this extra money. And also, I want to say this. You need to couple it with small business owner rent control. So rent control for small businesses, because what will happen is the moment we release it, all the small businesses will pay higher rents, and they'll be put out of business all over the state. It would be a devastating shock to all of us. So we have to couple rent control for small businesses along with Prop 13 reform.
Like I said in my opening, Prop 13 reform is a top priority, and the measure that is being evaluated and not yet circulated, but possibly will be, does include the small business kind of a caveat. So that's very important. But getting it passed is not going to be easy. So it's not just a matter of, are you for it? I think everybody in this room, I hope, is for it. The question is, what kind of coalition, what kind of campaign, and what kind of money will it take to actually get it on the ballot and pass it on the ballot? It's going to take a major commitment from the largest unions in our state who have the money to help put in a ballot campaign, along with some of the political philanthropists like the Tom Steyers of our state, to join together and, I hate to say this, but literally spend $70, $80, $90 million on a campaign to pass it, because you could bet yourself, as the sky is blue, that Chevron and all the corporations are going to pool their money and spend $100 million to defeat it, to twist the issue, and try to talk us out of it. So even with a strong grassroots operation, which I will be part of, we have to be out there working to raise the money to run a strong campaign and actually get it passed. Otherwise, you're just talking through your nose. Right? So let's do the hard work, raise the money, do the grassroots campaigning, and pass Prop 13 reform, because we do need it for our schools and other top priorities. And I'm going to make a strong commitment. I have made a strong commitment to be part of that effort. Assemblymember Phil Ting from San Francisco, chair of the Assembly Budget Committee, has endorsed me. He's been a leader in this effort, and we're going to work together to make it happen. Thank you.
We absolutely have to reform Prop 13. And starting with the commercial end of Prop 13 that's the movement that's out there right now. There's a strong and growing coalition of people working on this, and every single person in this room needs to be a part of that. And I'll tell you, this is our moment. You know, California really needs to be a beacon for this country on how we can take back the power from corporations, from the corporate greed that's leading our country right now. And closing this corporate loophole, not only will it bring the resources, as everyone said, to our schools and to our young people, and believe me, I see that every single day that I sit on that school board and I watch. We know the things, the kind of resources that we need to put into our schools to help close the achievement gap from cradle to career. But we're short on resources, and so we're always trying to do the most with what we have. So yes, we need the resources, but it's also important to show that we, as the people of California, can rise up and make it fair. And so I'm going to ask everyone here to be involved in helping with that campaign. I know I want to be a leader in that, and I think everyone here, if we all do our part and tell others to do our part, that we absolutely can make this change.
Yeah, like everyone here, I think we absolutely need strong Prop 13 reform. I think the bill will hopefully be on the ballot as a great start. And we need to be tying this to education every single time it comes up. Don't say our schools are underfunded like that just happened out of the blue. Our schools are underfunded because corporations are not paying their fair share. And we need to drill this home. When you think Prop 13, you should think our schools are suffering because of this. And I'm going to be a little bit heretical here. I'm not going to let the residential side completely off the hook. I understand not wanting to take two of the most powerful constituencies on at once at the same time. However, once we reform the commercial side, maybe we should also be thinking about regularly reassessing residential homes on a predictable schedule instead of whenever that home changes hands. There's a lot of that skews the housing market to have it be kind of on this weird arbitrary system, and we should be thinking about how we can improve that, and maybe even raising property taxes above 1%. It's not like this should be set in stone forever and ever. We could be investing in our communities even more if we were willing to do that. But let's start with the commercial side and make that happen.
And so I'm a big advocate for reforming Prop 13. In fact, most of you didn't get a chance to get my card because I got in here a little late. So please pick one up. But you'll see on the back of it, The first thing I talk about is reforming Prop 13. And the reason that we have to do that, it's imperative that we do that, is because we need to fund our schools. And I believe that with reforming Prop 13, we can have free preschool. We can have free community college. You know, we can dream and dream. There's so many things that we can do, but we'll only be able to do it when we work together. That's the way we as a society can get back control of our government. If you go to my website, javanka.org, when you open up the front page, you'll see that I am a corporate money-free candidate. And as a corporate money-free candidate, you can trust me to make sure that these kinds of issues are addressed radically and courageously. And that's what we have to do. Now, many of you are, we're next door, we're neighbors. We're neighbors to Richmond. And in Richmond, we have unified and taken back control of our government, and we could do the same thing as it regards to Prop 13.
So next up, we have a question about climate change. Even if we begin to aggressively cut carbon emissions, a certain amount of climate change is already locked in. I walked past daffodils in late January on my way here. We're having a dry year after we just finished one of the most severe droughts in California's history. What are you going to do to help our communities respond to the impacts of climate change, especially those families that have limited incomes?
It's an important question because we're going to be living with this. Our kids are going to be living with the impacts of climate change. It's not too late to do as much as we can to stop it. And that's why I've spent over a decade working in Sacramento to pass and implement AB 32, California's Global Warming Solutions Act, to get cleaner energy, cleaner cars, cleaner trucks and construction equipment out on the street to improve our health and to protect our climate. But what we need to do to make sure that we're ready for climate change when it hits, we need to have a study around sea level rise to make sure that we have the working lands and the infrastructure to make sure that our shoreline is protected, and that where we have shoreline resources now, we need to have habitat for our birds, for our flora and fauna, for our people to be able to have recreational opportunities. We need to start that planning process now so we know what that infrastructure is going to cost later. We need to be ready for extreme heat days so that people, especially our elderly and our seniors, will be able to have a safe place to go on those extreme weather days. There's a lot that we need to do to get ready for adaptation, but in the meantime, I'm not done working on solutions to stop climate change from being as devastating as it could be.
So this is something I've been thinking about a lot. So my husband and I recently put solar panels in on our home, and we bought an electric car. And it really felt great the first time I drove that electric car around. I was like, wow, why are we using gasoline? This is so great. The car that we have, it even kind of drives nicer than the gas car that I usually drive. But then I also had that moment of like, wait a minute though, this has been really expensive. And fortunately, my husband and I have good paying jobs. I have a nice union job. And we were able to do that to our home, and we were able to buy that car, but most people don't have those resources. And I think it's of absolute importance that we bring everyone along when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis. I once heard this statement that said, if racism were up to Black people, it'd be over already. And I have to kind of say that, if climate change was up to probably the well-to-do people in Albany and Berkeley, it would be over already. So we need to bring everyone along. We need to bring everyone under the umbrella of environmentalists and make sure that we make climate change affordable, I guess I would say. Make sure that everyone can participate. Thank you.
I'm not going to use the word climate change because climate change is too nice. It's called global warming because that's what it is. I studied cellular molecular biology and biochemistry, and along with that, I did study environmental science. in college. We actually had solar panels since 2000 on our home and on our pool, and we've been dealing with this for a very long time in my home. And this is something that's very close to me. I've been in the Sierra Club for a very long time, actually since I was in college. And this is something that is very close to home for us. I believe that, you know, in order to have environmental justice, you need to go into the communities that are most impacted by it. We always talk about, when we talk about environmental justice, everybody talks about Chevron, but there are actually 5 refineries in the Bay Area, if you include Phillips 66 and Shell and Valero and Tesoro, and including distribution in Westpac. All of those need to be talked about, as well as the lead in the water. And you talk about the solar ice packs. You need to talk about all of that when you're talking about the environment. Don't just include the low-hanging fruit, and talk about bringing people of marginalized communities into the fold, and bring legislation about that makes everyone have a say in what's going on, and you make it mandatory for at a county level, at a state level, at a local level. You bring everybody into the fold by bringing legislation about, and you got to have the legislative courage to put the money on the table. Again, I say our budget reflects our values. Put it in the budget. Make these items affordable for people from a budget level. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm an environmental lawyer, and I work specifically in the areas of poverty alleviation and environmental repair. So this is an opportunity, because where there's environmental degradation, there's also poverty. And curing one cures the other. On the website, we have a plan, we call it the Green New Deal, and it's essentially, you know, leveraging this need. So for instance, on my job, we created a multi-$100-million plan to create electric vehicle charging stations all through the state, tied to low-income reentry workers developing them. So this is an opportunity. Also, with sea level, you talk about adaptation, they call this, right? So as the sea level rises, we have to like repair the roads and bring the wires back and just adapt. That is a massive infrastructure opportunity. So when you have high unemployment among low-skilled workers and tremendous environmental infrastructure need, you can create policies to drive these forward, and that's what we'll do. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I've been working on climate change issues and other environmental issues for much of my adult life. In addition to my 9 years with the Union of Concerned Scientists here in California as a policy director, I worked for the Sierra Club. I studied natural resources in college. I've been actually doing these things for quite a long time. I wrote the law that requires new cars to have labels on them that tell us what the relative greenhouse gas emissions and smog emissions are. I was one of two lead lobbyists on the state law that passed about 10, 11, 12 years ago that prevents new coal contracts from being used for our in-state electricity. I took the lead in Oakland from stopping the coal trains and the coal terminal from being built. There's a lot we have to do still. I've been working on environmental issues, clean energy issues, and getting into the weeds of those issues for a long time, and there's still more to do. For example, adaptation for climate change. We need more wetlands along our shoreline to be the buffer that we need. If you live on the shoreline, that the cities and counties across the state will have to do. So more wetlands on our shorelines and our waterways. Reduce air pollution. I've been working on these issues for a long time. I'm going to push to have more clean energy. I'm the vice chair of East Bay Community Energy. I'm pushing that to be a success and more clean energy. We have a lot to do, and I'm the one who actually has the expertise and the proven history, both at the state level and the local level, to get it accomplished. Thank you so much.
So I'm really glad for this question, because climate change or global warming needs to be a top priority for all of us. So there's a few things that we really need to focus on. First of all, we have got to eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, I know that's a huge lift, but that has to be our goal, and that has to be what we're working towards. We have to address rising shoreline issues. We have, there's a really interesting project going on right now called Resilient Cities, which allows a public-private, nonprofit, philanthropic partnership to come up with ways that we can develop our cities to address the change in our water systems. We have to address water pollution and water flow and in this state in a sustainable way. We also really have got to address not just emissions, but air pollution. And that is something that is impacting our children and our communities, and largely low-income communities and communities of color. So we have to make sure that that part of our environmental plan doesn't get lost, that we're focusing on that. And finally, you know, I am a public education person, and it is incredibly important, if we are really going to change our future, which is really what this question's about, that we have to include sustainable education about sustainability in our science lessons in our schools. And I'm doing that in Berkeley right now, and I'm deeply committed to make sure that we do that statewide, because if our kids don't understand about sustainability and the impact on our climate of our human behavior, then we're never going to be able to make change.
So climate change is coming, and it's honestly the thing that scares me the most right now in the world. We need first and foremost to assess the impact of what does it mean for California if we have bigger, longer droughts than we've had historically? What does it mean if we have 3 feet of sea level rise, 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet? We need to be prepared for this. And we could have a public works program to help us make the necessary preparations, install clean energy and clean energy storage. But we also need to raise the price of carbon. It's too low right now if we're going to actually meet these goals in a way that brings everyone on board. The thing with that is that raising the price of carbon raises the price of energy, and that hurts low-income people first and foremost. And so what do we do about that? We could institute a carbon dividend. This is an idea that was being proposed last summer, and in the Assembly I'll revive it. The idea is that you put a fee on carbon extraction and distribute the money, that the revenue generated from that, evenly. The idea is that if you're polluting less than your average person, and if you're low income or middle income, you almost certainly are, then you will gain money out of that system. So the cost of living for you goes down and the cost of carbon goes up.
So what will I do to respond to the climate change? I can tell you what I have been doing for the last 7 years, working in Richmond, working in a city that has one of the biggest polluters in the state, working with Chevron. What we have done in Richmond is first of all, we elected corporate money-free candidates so that we're not beholden to any corporations. We're only beholden to the people. And so my job is to make sure that the residents in Richmond are safe and healthy. I work as a children's mental health specialist for Contra Costa County, and every child, pretty much every child, the majority of children that come into our clinic seeking services have asthma. And so that was one of the reasons why I ran for city council in the first place, is because I wanted to do something to change that narrative. So what we have been doing in Richmond is we have held Chevron up. We have held them to a high esteem. We have lifted the bar to ensure they reduce their greenhouse gases, and we've done a whole lot. You can look up what I've done for this, javanka.org.
Thank you. So there's a couple of things I think we need to do to deal with this impending crisis, and it worries me to know, and I have a 14-month-old daughter, and I think about her future and her children's future and what the world looks like for our children, and it's very frightening. One, we need to do everything we can to halt global warming as much as we can, and climate change, which includes supporting use of renewables, reducing our fossil fuels, incentivizing renewables. The second thing I think we need to do is really be prepared for these natural disasters. My dad fought wildfires for the U.S. Forest Service for 35 years in Tahoe National Forest, and I've seen what happens, how these wildfires come, and because of these droughts, it has major implications on these communities. We have to be prepared for more wildfires. We have to be prepared for longer droughts, and we're going to need resources in order to do that, both from the federal and state government, to really deal with that. We need to be prepared for the public health implications of what this means for folks, and that includes more resources for our health needs, which I think will be critical. And the last thing I'll say, my time is up, but we have to be able to hold our corporate polluters accountable. We need mechanisms in order to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. That brings to a close the moderated session of questions. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience now.
So when we learned about this event, we were asked to come up with questions from the business community. And so we talked to the board of the Chamber and the Solano Avenue Association, and we did come up with a question. And it comes from watching small businesses attempt to open on our unique street here and be discouraged by the expenses of meeting the regulations, the requirements, and the delays and the like. So places have been open for a year before they can even, paying rent for a year before they can even open. I believe in the regulations. I believe in the what we're asking people to do, but I don't like the idea that we're asking private individuals to fund our public goods. So what could we do to support small businesses to help them meet the needs and still open on our street?
First up is Rochelle.
Well, coming from my background as a city council member, I believe in local control. So as much as possible, I mean, there are definitely state regulations that we need to keep people safe. You know I really appreciated the state regulation of having, changing tables in the bathroom when I had a small baby. That was something I actually really appreciated, and I remember going across the state line to Nevada and they didn't have it, and I was like, where do I change my baby? So there are certain things that I think are very helpful to families and to people, but other than that, I think the more you can keep things with local control so that you can go to your city council members and discuss what, it's a little bit easier, they're a little bit more accessible, and then you can have that closer dialogue. I think that as much as we can as the state in terms of regulating a small business, I believe in leaving it up to the cities.
I think that cities should have incentives for small business. Small business fuels most of our jobs in cities, and they are the lifeblood of getting most of our, especially our young people, started on their first jobs. So the best way to start businesses or to get businesses on most of our main streets in our cities is small business. So to incentivize most businesses to start, we do need our Chamber of Commerce for most of our cities and our city councils to give some type of incentives for small businesses to start in our cities. And that starts from whether it's to narrow the regulations or help them with easing the zoning restrictions in those cities. And it starts not just local, but it has to start from those city councils.
Thank you. This is actually, I know quite well. My family has owned small businesses. My father and I opened a cafe most recently, and that experience was harrowing. I'm talking about like 18 months of waiting for this permit, waiting for this, waiting for that, waiting for this. One of my constituents now has been subjected to more than a year and a half of delay. And when you bore it down, when you really get into this, an equity arrangement or an equity problem starts to present itself. You notice that the minority-owned business owner is suffering greater. The woman-owned business, the black-owned business. So, one, we need to have rent control for small businesses. That's an issue of sustainability for communities and for jobs and growth. And then second, the same kind of aggressive approach we take for housing, so streamlining affordable housing so communities cannot prevent affordable housing being built. We need that for small businesses. There's no need for an 18-month myriad review time for any small business anywhere in the state.
Thanks for that question. It's easy to say, oh, we need to do more and remove regulations or streamline this, but the reality is, while each jurisdiction certainly could probably do a better job in streamlining the timing, how long it takes to get the permit done and streamline the process somewhat, and that should be done at the local level in Oakland, every city up here, absolutely. But each regulation, whether state regulation or city or county, has a purpose. And with a few exceptions, the purposes make a lot of sense. So I'm not going to be out there whole cloth trying to get rid of a whole bunch of state or local regulations just because they take a little time or cost a little money. They are there for a purpose, and in most cases they are to protect people. And I support those regulations, and I'm not going to weaken them in any way whatsoever. However, I will say this, as a city council member in Oakland, and this is a case in many cities, I think there should be efforts to promote locally owned independent businesses and encourage them, incentivize them, prioritize them, and discourage, whether through zoning or through getting in the back of the line or what have you, formula retail or chain stores. So that could be done at the local level. If the state can help in that regard, absolutely we should do that. And I absolutely support lifting the current state restriction on commercial rent control. Local jurisdictions should have that ability to make that decision for itself. Thank you.
I also support lifting that limitation. I think that that local jurisdictions should have that power to impose commercial rent control for small businesses. You know, small businesses are the heart of our communities, and I think what I'm hearing from that was really interesting, the way you posed that question, because it wasn't just get rid of the regulations. It's how can you make it easier so that we can actually get through the process and not go broke in doing it. And I think we really have to support locally owned small businesses in our communities. So I think the state can play a role in help streamlining, get through those regulations and helping to make that an easier process. I also think that we as a state, we should be looking at small business loans and supports for small businesses, particularly for new small businesses, small, medium, and very small micro businesses, as well as small businesses. And the other thing that I really think that we need to be focusing on is how we can support social enterprises. It's something that we really can build in the state, that we're not just looking at the single bottom line, but double and even triple bottom lines.
In terms of regulations, I think those should be mostly on a case-by-case basis. It's hard to know. I mean, they're each in there for a reason, and often it's a good reason, even when they're annoying. With two ideas that I think would be quite powerful here. One is the creation of a public bank that could be used for all sorts of purposes, but especially bringing in, supporting independently owned local businesses. Another great idea would be if we could dramatically increase the purchasing power of low and middle income people, and thus drastically increase the velocity of money. And if we had a universal basic income, all of a sudden people would be able to not just meet their basic needs, or a little bit less than that in many cases, but they'd be able to take their family out for dinner once in a while. They'd be able to get a new pair of shoes when they want one. And if we support communities from the bottom up, my policy is the exact opposite of the tax bill that just passed. I'm all about empowering people with cash transfers, trusting them to do what they want with their money. That would be huge for small businesses everywhere.
Well, I think we help small businesses by expediting licenses. And of course, we close the tax loophole on Prop 13, because then cities can have more revenues to be able to do the things that they need. I see what's happening in Richmond is a lot of our services are cut because we have no funding. And so cities need to be able to have the funding that they need to hire more employees. And when we have more employees, then these kinds of processes don't get just stuck and businesses waiting for their permit and licenses to come through.
So a couple things. I think a lot of this is around having a better run government and making sure that when businesses are going through these regulatory challenges, that our government is responsive. And President Obama started the digital office to try to digitize the federal government, which was no small feat. I think Trump's probably destroyed most of that at this point. But figuring out how we digitize our government, both at the state and local levels, so that our government is operating at the same pace and speed that many of you all operate in your private sector jobs and in your day-to-day life, I think is a big piece of this. The second thing I will say is some sort of small business tax breaks and or loans or incentives to make sure businesses have what they need. Small businesses are the engine of our country. That is, we are entrepreneurs in spirit. We need to be supporting our freelancers, our entrepreneurs, our people that are going out there and leaving their companies to take risks. That is the engine of America, so we need to be supporting that financially as well through small businesses. And the last thing I'll say is having local municipalities, local leaders really propping up and lifting up our small businesses and celebrating our small businesses and having campaign efforts around that, I think, is also critical.
First, as somebody who runs and operates a small business. I run a workers' rights law practice. I find that most of the regulations that somebody starting up a business is dealing with are the ones that are out there to protect workers. And they have a very important purpose, ensuring that everyone is earning a minimum wage that's enough to be able to afford to live in the communities that we work, and enough to support a middle-class economy, enough to make, we need to have workers' compensation insurance to make sure that when we do have a disaster on the job, that everyone is protected, everyone is able to transition back into the workforce and has decent health care. But I do find that from time to time there are some things that don't always make sense, and I think it's important to take a critical look at some of these things. That's why I worked with a group of employment lawyers to make sure that we supported some very careful reform that said that a business shouldn't get sued just because there's a late response to certain pay stub violations. So working with the business community is possible, but overall we need to just look at what really makes sense for our workers and protect our workers' rights whenever there's a criticism about is this really a regulation that's hurting our businesses. I do support incentives when they make sense, and I support reform when it makes sense, but overall I think our regulations are there for a reason, to protect our community.
Senate Bill 827. It's become kind of the divide amongst much of the progressive community here in the East Bay. I'm curious about what your opinions are of it, and would you vote for it, or would you want to modify it? What's your position?
I'm in support of it because I think that we need more transit-oriented transportation, more housing. But I'm in support of it in this manner. I believe that the housing has to be close to where people who need the most access to transportation need to have it. So those who are in more marginalized communities who now don't have that type of access to transportation. Right now, most of our transportation are in areas where you have to drive to get to, where you have to get to the transit lines. They've built like El Cerrito Plaza and out in Richmond, the BART lines are where you have to drive to actually get to the BART. So most of the people who actually need the transportation, the transit communities, or the people who really need the quote-unquote affordable housing, for what for me is low, moderate, and even market rate housing, they need it built. I would only support it if it's in those areas. So, and I'm supporting it in a 30-40-30 split, where 30 is low, 40 is moderate, and 30 is market rate. You can sell it wherever you want to, but only if it's in that type of split and it's in the areas where people most need the access to transit.
Thank you. So, you know, one of my constituents, one of my people came to see me because she had been displaced from Berkeley and was now living in Antioch. And her commute to the job she had in the city was so brutal, 2+ hours or something, she got fired. So she came to ask for a new job. And I'm like, well, you're still way out there, but all the jobs are way over here. That's our transit issue, our transit-oriented development. So this bill, SB 827, this is the number, right, 827? Yeah, you know, I like it in spirit. However, I think it's missing because there's an emergent set of best practices with housing. It's produce. We got to make a lot of housing. We have 20 million new people in California. We got to preserve existing affordable housing, and we got to protect people from displacement. And so much of what we're seeing here is the rampant uprooting of people and forced out to these poverty-filled exurbs, displacement. So that law needs some displacement measures written into it, coded into it before I support it. And it's very important that that completes his proposal, and then I'll support it.
SB 827, it's important that it was introduced in order to create the conversation about more housing near our true transit hubs. But it's January. The bill, if the bill keeps moving, it's going to be amended 14 times with 50 different amendments by the time it gets to the governor's desk, if it gets there at all this year. So it's a little too early for me to say I'm supporting it, but I'm certainly open to it. But things have to be changed in the bill or modified in some way. First of all, we have to maintain design review for the local community, for the local staff and the planning department. We don't want a bunch of ugly buildings just because we want to get more buildings. Two, we have to make sure that if you're going to take advantage of this new requirement, if this bill passed, that there must be an affordability component. A certain percentage of these additional units that you're allowed to build because of this new law must be below market for low, very low or moderate income housing or extremely low income housing. That's absolutely necessary. Without that, I'm against the bill. Three, we have to define what transit hub means. Is it just a bus line that goes every once in a while during rush hour, or is it a true transit hub where there's really bus lines all day long intersecting, or BART stations? So let's have a careful definition of transit hub. I've been a leader on affordable housing in Oakland, and I will be a leader on affordable housing in Sacramento. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm going to stand up. Why don't you all stand up too? Why don't you stand up? Because if you're like me, I'm so tired of sitting down. So why don't you stand up? You can stretch and listen to me while you're stretching. But you have to listen to me. So I support 827 but it needs a lot. It needs some amendments. It definitely needs some work. But I'm going to tell you why I support it in concept. Because we have to be doing what we can to support transit-oriented development. We have to be thinking about what do we want our cities to look like in the future? What do we want us to look like in 2075, not 1975? How are we going to create green tech jobs? How are we going to decrease our use of fossil fuels? How are we going to decrease our dependence on cars? How are we going to increase the density of housing so that we're not using so much fossil fuels to get to and from our homes? So I think 827 is the first bill that I've seen that's really attempting to get us there. So I'm excited about it. It does need some help. It needs affordability requirements. That's really important. I also believe it needs local design review, but not just design review that's going to hold up these projects with NIMBY efforts, but rather design review that's going to be streamlined under the new housing law and coupled with the density requirements that we have in the state. And finally, if we're going to do this, I think this is an opportunity to build in some of the sustainable building and green building requirements so that we could have, these should be model projects, both for community and for housing. So I'm excited about what 827 could bring for our communities. I just think we have to work with the legislature to improve it.
Like everyone, I am in the yes but modified camp on this. Radically increase density and housing in general, and that has to go somewhere, and transit hubs are the most obvious place to start. That said, the bill does need an affordability requirement. I think it should have some kind of environmental impact requirement. And it's also a bit one size fits all where, if you're near a transit hub, you have drastically reduced regulations, and if you're outside that zone, then the regulations all kick back in. And so maybe we modify it a little bit so that depending on how far you are or how active that transit hub is, we have sort of a gradient. Also, I do like, one thing I do like in the bill is that it reduces the parking requirement around transit hubs. We need to be looking toward a future with much less car ownership, and we also need to be continually investing in our mass transit so that as we increase density near these hubs, we can actually handle it, in our transit system, and it doesn't just make the BART that much tighter during rush hour.
I like it because it actually does start the conversation that needs to be had. And that's the conversation about affordable housing, about building near transit hubs, about just the what we're seeing now with our freeways just packed that you're not moving most of the time. And so we have to encourage public transportation, and at the same time, as Owen here said, that we have to be able to fund them and provide the resources that they need. So in concept, I like it, but I believe we also, in doing that, we absolutely have to hold those developers accountable to creating sustainable, environmentally sound and housing that folks can actually afford.
So I think we have a regional challenge on housing here. So San Francisco added 38,000 new jobs last year, and approval for 4,000 housing units. So where do those folks live, right? Apple built their huge complex on the peninsula. They were required by their $5 billion complex. It's gorgeous. They were required by local law to add 11,000 parking spots. How much housing? 0. So you have folks coming in for these good paying jobs. Where are those people going to live, right? They're going to go up the peninsula, into the South Bay and the East Bay. We have to build more homes. So I support this bill in concept. I do agree it's going to go through a lot of iterations. But I do think we need to build housing of all income levels. We need it desperately here. I would like to see in this bill measures around displacement to make sure folks don't get displaced. I love the idea around requirements on greening, making sure we have green buildings. But I do think it's important that we do build more. We build more transit-oriented housing. But this is also going to mean a huge investment in transit. We've got to fix our BART, right? We have to fix what we have, but we're going to probably have to get another tunnel as well because we're at capacity. And we got to integrate our transit system here in the Bay Area. That's a whole other conversation, but I think that's a critical piece. Housing and infrastructure go hand in glove together. We have to figure out these problems and move into a modern future in terms of what our communities look like.
When I was getting my master's degree in city and regional planning, I wrote the title of it as "It Takes a Transit Village," named after then Senator Clinton in her book at the time. But what I think is important is to recognize that we have some cities that are keeping up with their housing obligations and are building enough housing. There are some cities that are building enough housing, but it's not enough affordable housing. And there are some cities that are just not doing their fair share. And I think that the crux of this problem is in the South Bay of the region and on the peninsula. But what this bill does is it essentially replaces the judgment of your city council to say that every parcel that's close to a BART station or regional rail station is going to be 8 stories tall. And everything that's near a bus line, unless it's 45 feet or smaller, is going to be 5 stories tall. And building and zoning is just more complicated than that. Good urban design counts. Good design review implementation counts. Affordable housing counts. Other community benefits and making sure that we have planning that works within our communities. What I would like to see is this concept built more into the overall planning concept of Senate Bill 375. There's a regional plan, cities have obligations, and if the cities fall short of those obligations, then something kicks in. The legislature's left a lot of question marks about that process. Andy. This concept makes some sense as part of that process.
We've been falling short in providing housing or creating housing, building housing for over a decade, about 200,000 units per year. And that is projected to go into the future. In El Cerrito, we see that, we visualize that, we know that we have to do our part. We are doing our part. We are building around our transit stations. We have plans for building both around the Del Norte and the Cerrito Plaza BART stations. And when I go and I talk to other leaders around the Bay Area, they're talking to me about how they can't hardly get an apartment building built, nonetheless a tall one. And you know, there's just certain places that are not doing their fair share. And so this is where I go against my nature to go with local control. I think this is somewhere where the state really has to step in, or we're not going to be able to provide housing for people. And if we're not able to provide housing for people, the situation that we're in is only going to get worse and worse. It's going to be hard for people that go to Albany High School to even afford to live here when you grow up. And I think that's wrong. So, you know, come to El Cerrito Plaza. We'll build a house for you over there.
Hi, I would like to know your thoughts about the single payer bill in its current form. And for example, the bill's fee-for-service model, the scope of nursing home coverage, the cost, the funding sources, things like that.
Thank you. 60-second response, huh?
I believe that's Senate Bill 562.
Right. So, look, without a doubt, healthcare is a human right, and I support the implementation of a single-payer plan in California. I think it can be done by reorienting existing systems and moving them in basically a new format. I would also propose the creation of a state bank, which would act as a financing agent that could empower our health agencies to negotiate in a proper way against drug companies and insurers, and really just kind of take on the system and refashion it. Our economy is so big, our population is so big, we could redraft the entire healthcare industry for the country just through California. So I do support that. There, 30 seconds. So to answer your question, you know, on a quick side note, but related, the Trump administration just relaxed the ability, relaxed safeguards for seniors living in senior care facilities. So you can injure them and get away with it. So right away, we have to just counter that and come back to protecting our people. And then that baseline of protection affords us the ability to build whole systems of care around them, provided we provide the funding.
Hi. I support the single-payer bill that's currently in Sacramento. And will it need to be tweaked? It's actually already in the process of being tweaked, and there's a lot of questions that are not yet answered, and they need to be answered before it actually gets to the governor's desk. Most likely, it's not going to happen this year, although we should make that effort and see if we can make it happen. I'm more thinking it's more likely to happen with our next governor, whoever that next governor might be. So let's work hard to make it this year. If it doesn't work this year, keep at it. I've supported single-payer ever since former State Senator Nick Petras in the late 1980s introduced one of the first single-payer bills in the state. I've been a strong supporter ever since. I'll be working with California advocates for nursing home reform, with health access, and of course with the nurses in answering all the questions that are not yet answered and having a strong bill that has financing mechanism built into it. That's going to have to include a tax on businesses in lieu of the health care premiums they're already paying today. So it's not a matter of increasing a lot of the taxes, although some taxes will be increased overall. It's moving aside what we're already paying into our healthcare system and funneling that into to paying for the single-payer system, or Medicare for all, as we should be calling it. So I strongly support that, and I will work on the details to get that financing done right. And hopefully I'll be on the budget committee, which is my first choice committee assignment, and I'll work with the budget chair and the ad hoc committee being that was put forward by the speaker to make it happen. Thank you so much.
He was on that wrap-up train for like 10 seconds.
Yeah, I support single payer, and I support 562, and I think it's critical that we are engaging in this conversation, and that conversation is continuing. And you know, there's going to be a long road from here to there. I think there's, you know, our healthcare system is incredibly complex. The health insurance and hospital industries are both really powerful. So what we need to do, this is going to be a huge, really a socialization of our which I'm proud of, which I believe in, our socialization of our healthcare system, which is going to mean the profits that the hospitals are holding on to and the profits that the insurance industries are holding on to have to be shifted over to the public system. I think we can totally do it. I don't want to underestimate what's going to be involved in making that happen, but I am committed to being a leader in helping make that happen in Sacramento. We absolutely have to work together with all of the different stakeholders to come up with a plan, not just for where we want to be, but how to get there. And that's what I'm really good at. I'm really good at bringing people together, coming up with a strategic plan, and then taking one foot in front of the next to get us there.
So yeah. On, is it? Oh, there we go. The main focus of how this is going to work seems to be around funding, and single payer ultimately should be less expensive when you take into all the administrative costs into account. Once we get it set up, it's just the setting up that might require some additional startup costs. But in terms of how we're doing that, like Dan said, the main trick is to capture the money we're already spending on our healthcare right now. So if employers are no longer paying into the system, we could introduce some kind of corporate tax that helps fund the single payer system. We should also be aware that this is likely going to require some amount of cooperation with the federal government, which might not be coming for a couple of years, to be able to use the money we're using right now for Medicare. And so we should be thinking about transition steps that'll make it an easier leap to single payer. One that I would really support is a state public option that would allow anyone to pay in, and that would be based on your income level.
So I absolutely support SB 562. Went to Sacramento to speak in favor of it. Passed a resolution in Richmond in support of it. And is it going to be expensive? Absolutely. Of course, it's going to be expensive. But it's more expensive not having it right now, right? It's more expensive having people die as a result of not having health care. So in the world's largest economy, the sixth largest economy in the world, we can certainly afford to be able to have single payer throughout the state, and then of course ultimately, the ideal would be to have it federally. So there are lots of ways that we can do it, and I'm a wraparound facilitator, and so I sit at the table with all kinds of folks, and we put our heads together, and we come up with solutions to really difficult challenges and problems. And I believe that when we do that as a state, regionally, statewide, the answer is there. We have the answer when we work together.
In 2003, I got a call from a good friend of mine who said he just tested positive with HIV. I needed me to pick him up from the clinic. And I drove to the Mission District and I sat with him, and he told me he didn't have any health insurance. And that sent me on a path to get much more involved in health reform. And 7 years later, I was sitting in the Roosevelt Room with the President of the United States, watching the healthcare votes come in on ACA. And we passed ACA, and I got my hug from the President. I have worked on big issues, and I've worked on healthcare policy. I know how hard it is to achieve that. I believe we can have single payer in California. I believe we can have single payer in this country and have to work towards that. But what I am worried about is Donald Trump is doing everything he can to destabilize these exchanges here in California. And so what I want to do is, and I wrote an op-ed on this about 6 months ago, call for a public option that should be on the exchange that anyone can be a part of, so that we stabilize our current healthcare system. So when Donald Trump takes us like Thelma and Louise style over the cliff, we have something to protect ourselves as a pathway towards single payer, because it's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to need approval from the federal government, and I think in this current administration, he's not going to be too kind to want to work with us on that. So let's set up our system so that in 2020, when we take back the White House, we have a president we can work with and actually pass single payer.
So I think it's very difficult to make a public option work without enough subsidies to be able to invest in the system. I think the example of Healthy San Francisco is actually one of the types of approaches that where you can still have a public option work. But what we really need to do is recognize that the high deductible plans that we're seeing with the Affordable Care Act in California, $6,000 deductibles, even some of the relatively affordable copay plans are still pushing a lot of the costs onto healthcare consumers, ourselves. This is not really affordable healthcare that we've got going on. So we need to go to single payer, and I strongly support moving in that direction and making sure that we implement it with financing that I think could be done with a corporate tax. There's a proposal out there with an exemption for businesses that are 2 million gross receipts annually and below, but everything above that pays a corporate tax, a small share of payroll taxes, and some have proposed some sales taxes. I tend to prefer more progressive taxes. Where I will stand strong is making sure that medical necessity is accessible, that when you have medically necessary care, that you don't have a bureaucratic appeals process that denies you and denies you. We need to make sure that when you need care that you get it. And that in the legislature, that's the focus that I'll have working on single payer.
We are currently spending $368 billion a year in the state of California on our health care. That's everybody paying for everything, dentist appointments, home health, everything. To ensure everyone, bring that number up to $400 billion, and that's the number that you'll hear reported. So that's not new spending. That is how much it would take to bring up everyone covered. But then what you don't hear is, if we were to implement 562, the healthcare costs would come down to $331 billion. We're already spending $225 billion on Medi-Cal and Medicare. That's already being spent. So that leaves about a $100 billion gap. That $100 billion gap, now remember, we're going to close this gap, and when the gap is closed, there will be no more deductibles, no more co-payments, no more insurance through your work where they're paying as well. And instead, we would have a tax. We would have a tax on businesses, 2%, possibly a sales tax, 2%, or like Andy said, possibly a payroll tax. And that would be less than what most people are spending now and less than what most of our businesses are spending now. And that's how we'll fund it.
Part of being a leader or a representative is you have to tell people some hard truths. Now, while I support the concept of 562, it's going to be very, very hard to get everybody to buy into it. Not the people who agree with you. On this one side, people will agree with you. But the people who agree with the man on the other side of the country who's occupying the White House, you got to get them to buy into this. And getting them to buy into it is a whole different ball game, because they're also are the same people who will be affected by 562. Their taxes also have to pay for this. So this is part of being a leader, is getting you to understand that this is not something that only Democrats can pass or buy into. So let's be realistic and talk real. And that's my job, is to tell you the truth. And the truth is that they aren't gonna go for this lock, stock, and barrel. So in the meantime, as a federal contract person, I'm gonna tell you what I will support is, from a federal standpoint, what we do in contracts is we say, you pay according to the wage determination register. We charge the employer a certain fee per hour that they have to pay into a benefits plan, and they have to pay every worker that $4.50 whatever cents every hour that they work. And if not, if you're a non-worker, then you're eligible to be paid 45 mistakenly opened up Medicare and Medicaid for everyone.
We appreciate your passion.
Yeah, I want to know at the state level what you would do to permanently bar oil drilling on our coast.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I've been, of course, against offshore oil drilling for quite a long time. And for that matter, I'm not a big fan of onshore oil drilling either. In fact, let me answer that a couple ways. First of all, one of the bills that I'll be introducing during my first term is to immediately ban fracking for oil in California, and to ban fracking for natural gas within a 2-year phase-out period. That's absolutely necessary. We do not need to be fracking in our state or in our entire country, and that'll be a high priority for me. I have some expertise on those issues. I'm going to work with a bunch of experts to make sure we could pass that bill, and that's a high priority. 2, offshore oil drilling. We need to make sure our members of Congress, first of all, we have to flip the Republican seats to Democratic seats. Please, all of you, in addition to volunteering on my campaign, please, all of you, support the campaigns going on in the state to flip the seats and take back Congress. That's very, very important in order to achieve what we all want to achieve, which is, among other things, among many things, is to stop offshore oil drilling, or the potential for offshore oil drilling off our coast. So I'm going to work hard with our senators, with our governor, and with whoever else in Congress will listen to us, and if we get enough votes in Congress, we could stop the president's alleged plan to try to open that back up to offshore oil drilling, both through the courts and through Congress. It's a high priority for me, and I will work hard to make that happen. Thank you.
So first of all, it's going to sound a lot like what Dan said. The first of all is we need to ban fracking, and fracking has not only it's having such severe environmental impacts on our entire state, on our water systems, and we really and our environment, and we really have got that has to be a top priority, and that's something that we have control over. I agree. We have got to spend a lot of time trying to turn Congress. We also need to see what we can do at the state level to create disincentives for the oil industries to be able to produce oil and off our shores, and then to process them on our shores. So I think we have to have a multi-tiered attack on this, particularly because of the control of the federal government. And I just want to put in a plug for going to my website at judyappel.org to judyappel.com, sorry, to find out some of our strategies and to see how you can volunteer.
So yeah, we can do a lot within our borders, within our land borders, like banning fracking and moving toward a clean energy economy and raising the cost of carbon. As for offshore, that's tricky because that is under control of the federal government. I have heard of some creative solutions such as banning offshore pipelines, which doesn't necessarily stop offshore drilling, but might at least throw a wrench in things. But honestly, what we're really going to have to do is we're going to need to win elections. We don't control the federal government right now, and that's causing all these other problems. And so, yes, we can get creative, try to slow this process down, because if we can slow down offshore drilling enough, eventually we'll be able to ban it, and we'll be able to be cost competitive with renewable energy. But the ultimate solution is to get certain people out of certain houses.
That's right. So right away, ban fracking. Right away, as Owen mentioned, I mean, we can do what we can do within the state, within the region. We can do what we can do, but really, it's going to take a revolution. It's going to take a revolution to start electing corporate money-free candidates at all levels of our government. Otherwise, we continue to be slaves to what corporations want. They write their own bills and they give it to their people who they helped elect. And so the immediate answer to that is we can start having the kinds of policies that we're protesting for and rallying for when we start electing corporate-free candidates who are not beholden to these oil companies, and so can say, this is what I'm going to do. And any one of us can say, this is what we want to do, certain things. We want to stop fracking. We want to stop oil drillings. But we have to look at our voting records and see where we have stood with regard to standing up to oil companies. And I have done that.
I as with I think everyone on the stage agree, I oppose offshore drilling, and I also oppose fracking. I think the other big challenge here is our need to address the demand. People are buying gas because they're driving cars, right? Many of us drove here tonight, right? So I think we need a broader systems conversation around supporting renewable energy, incentivizing electric vehicles, doing everything we can to reduce fossil fuels, supporting the clean energy economy. So I think there's a broader conversation around this in terms of, the federal government having control over this. I've been endorsed by Kamala Harris. She's a fighter on a lot of these issues. She's someone I could work with here, obviously in state and working with our federal partners and the folks that we have alliances with. And again, yes, agree, we need to get the crazy guy out of the White House and also flip the Senate and the House. So there's a lot of work needs to be done. So yes, in addition to I know Dan made his plug, volunteering for my campaign, you can also campaign for a lot of House seats that are up for grabs here in California. So we need a broader systems change around this, and we need to fundamentally, I think, address the demand piece of the equation, and do everything we can and continue to lead as California has on a lot of the renewable energy work.
First thing I ever did as an environmental activist was organize a beach cleanup near where I grew up in San Mateo County. And when I first encountered what offshore oil drilling looked like and felt like, it was when my sister visited my sister at Santa Barbara, and I found this gunk on my feet after I was so excited to be out on the beach. And it is terrible that we allow this kind of destruction off of our coastline in any place, let alone that the Mad Orange Man is actually considering making this everywhere except for off the coast of Florida, a blatant political patronage there. What I think we need to do is fully fund the Attorney General's office to make sure that any actual regulation, right now we're just reacting to an executive order and some tweets, but if there's any regulation, California needs to be on the front lines suing the U.S. government to stop that regulation from taking effect. We also need to be banning fracking, banning new infrastructure within the waters that California regulates. California can regulate a couple dozen miles off of the shore. So we can stop new pipelines and new infrastructure in the waters that we regulate to make sure that there's no pipeline in between here and there where the oil drillers want to install that new infrastructure.
Yes, I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I too had tar on my feet, and it was really hard to get off. I think baby oil worked, but it was really gross. You know, I came from Fresno, California, and I moved to the beach specifically because I wanted to be, you know, at the beach, and to see those rigs out there every day was just this horrible reminder of what was going on. And we don't need more of that. We don't need more of that in California. And I was absolutely disgusted to hear the news that, you know, Trump made some sort of sweetheart deal with Florida saying, oh, yeah, well, your beaches where he hangs out, they need to stay pristine. But the beaches in California, well, you know, screw them. So, you know, water is life. You know, I'm concerned about, you know, not only what the beaches look like for us, but for the marine animals that are out there trying to survive in that environment. You know, and I know that we need to do everything that we can here. So yes, I agree. We need to ban fracking. We need to do more environmental regulations, you know, 100% renewable cars that run on electricity. And I will be willing to do all of that and more when I get to the assembly. Thank you.
So they mentioned Florida. One of the reasons that Florida got the deal that they had is because Interior Secretary Zinke, Florida petitioned them for that deal. So one of the things that California can do is raise a little hell. You got to raise a little hell, and you got to tell them that you want the same deal. And that's what needs to be done. But it's not just fracking. Remember that that's just one method of getting that oil out of the ground. We need to keep all the oil in the ground. And in order to do that, there's fracking, there's pumping, there's lots of methods that are used to extract that natural resource from the ground. So we can't just concentrate on fracking. You got to concentrate on anything that's going to upset the natural that oil, that core of the ground. So everybody always says fracking, but you got to remember that there's lots of ways to upset the ground. So the other thing that we have to consider is that we need to make sure that we're protecting not just against car-driven, but we also use gas in our homes to heat our homes. So we need to be looking at other resources for that too.
Thank you.
You know, this is the last gasp of a dying monster. They're clinging to oil, clinging to war, clinging to all these things that have brought us to almost to ruin as a planet. Now, in my career, I work extensively in renewable energy. It's what I do. And we design it, we implement it, we push it, and every step of the way we get pushback from Washington. Now, California needs to stand up and start, using its weight. We drive the whole country. So we could tax oil extraction fees, right? Of course we're going to ban it, of course, yes. But if we can't cross the federal divide legally, we can tax it so bad that it makes bad business, because it is bad business. So extraction fees, fees on transport, insurance taxes, we can hit it 26 different ways to Sunday, which we have to do. And going further, you can go to my website, a small plug, benbartlettca.com, and click on the New Green Deal tab and see my whole environmental platform.
Hi, my name is Navin Naik. I am a senior at Albany High School and the student board member on the AUSD Board of Education. And so I know you guys talked a lot about education and how to fix, the budget issues via Prop 13. So I'm going to amend my original question to be as follows. Besides repealing Prop 13 to collect more funding for schools, what other specific actions would you take to ensure the least amount of damage to school districts facing budget cuts? Thank you.
I'm so happy you asked that question because I was waiting for an education question. Because education for me is it's a cornerstone for our entire state and for our future. And in fact, almost every issue that I look at, I bring back to education. So I appreciate your saying that. There's a few things that we absolutely need to do. One of the things that we have to really focus on is creating positive school climates in our school and helping to close end the school to prison pipeline. Our kids cannot succeed if they're out of school. And if our kids don't believe that we believe in them and that we love them, they will fail. And I know I always say that up at the dais in Berkeley, and people kind of laugh at me and roll their eyes when I say we need to bring more love to our classrooms, but we absolutely do. So that's one thing. We have to invest in paying our teachers more. We underpay our teachers, and by doing that, we undermine our public school system. So we have to invest that Prop 13 money, maybe some of our cannabis money, prioritize our budget to pay our teachers more. And finally, we have got to plug this problem with charter schools. Charter schools are absolutely undermining our public school system, and I cannot emphasize how that's happening. Our public schools are bleeding because of because of the money that's going into charter schools. Our facilities are being taken over by charter schools, so we have to have local control of charter applications and make sure that we have that we put a stop to the growth of charter schools in our state.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I like to start from 0 on up, because by the time, we talk a lot about free community college, and that's a great idea. But by the time you're 18, we see all the racial inequities that we see across society. So we need to start much earlier than that, and that's with universal pre-K. So we need to be providing a quality education and quality care from the get-go. And yeah, like Judy says, we do need to address charter schools. There are a lot of charter schools which are basically an online course. It's like, a bunch of online videos, and that's called a school, and there are companies that are cashing in big time just by emailing students a video, and like maybe once a week you get access to a teacher. We need to have standards that we judge every single school by in terms of educational achievement and preparedness for the next level. And schools that are not meeting those standards need to be adjusted or shut down immediately, and we need to be able to fund having actual teachers in actual schools for every single student.
So charter schools are sucking the lifeblood out of our public schools. I'm a big public school fan. I went to public school. I got a great education, but we didn't have what we have now, and that's the profiteering of education. And I think that that's wrong. And so I believe that we need to have a moratorium on charter schools at the state level. In Richmond, we did sort of a version of that by having a moratorium on many new schools. I think that we also have to let teachers teach. We also have to pay teachers what they're worth. We have to have free preschool, and we also, and I believe, because we've done it once before in California, and that's having free college as well.
So I'm a pure product of public education. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for good public schools that I had access to. And my day job now is I do children's advocacy work, advocating for more funding for early childhood development, early childhood education, and funding for K through 12. So I'm a big proponent of our public education and think that we need to do everything we can to support it. And it does start before school age. It starts at 0. It starts at prenatal care. We need to make sure we're having all the social safety nets to support that. So I think that's really critical. I support local control funding formula, which is aiming to address some of the needs that we see in terms of the racial disparities within funding for education. I think we need to, I know Governor Brown just added more resources to local control funding formula. We need to double down on that and continue to support local control funding formula. And a lot of the schools taking that money are doing restorative justice programs and a lot of really good work with that. We should consider more taxes on the wealthy to support our schools. I'm a big proponent of that. We have the highest concentration of billionaires and millionaires in California, 124 billionaires, 772,000 millionaire homes. Let's have them pay some more so that our kids can get a better education, which I think is important. We've got to pay our teachers more, provide more professional development, and I oppose any kind of private voucher system at all. We've got to fund our public schools, period.
Thank you for the question, and it's great to see the involvement from so many students here tonight. I was involved when I was back in school. I served as a student member of my school board and had the opportunity to make real change in a math curriculum issue that we were dealing with at the time. It turned out the problem was lack of investment in teacher training. And meanwhile, I think overall we were finding a problem in not having enough resources for good after-school work opportunities. When it came down to it, the teachers simply weren't paid enough to be there until 3 o'clock that day, let alone to stay with us until the evenings when our parents would come home. So I think what we need to do is invest in those programs, and particularly to expand the amount of resources that are coming in. Prop 13 is not going to do enough. We need to close another $6 billion in corporate tax loopholes. We need to be raising income taxes on the wealthy. We need to be making it easier for local governments to tax themselves to invest in local schools and help local school districts receive the money where it's needed the most. I think local control funding formula is a really good model to be strengthening and to channel more money into to make sure that our East Bay schools are getting the resources that we need to educate our students much better.
I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for education. I had a good public school education. I had a great public school college experience. And then I have to admit, go to a private school to finish my nursing school. But the point is that the state helped me. I had Cal grants. And without that, I don't know if I would have made it. So as I said before, we need to start early. We need to start with preschool education. We need to fund our K through 14 very well. I will stand up and do everything I can to prevent any cuts and to promote more funding. Prop 13 reform and all the other suggestions that you've heard up here. And I think we need more in our schools, because school is more than just taking tests. It's about the emotional development that you have while you're there. We need counselors. We need healthcare in school so that you can pay attention when you're in class, because there's so much going on between your peers and what's at home. And if you can get a handle on that, you can get a handle on your life and you can be successful. And I hope that every single one of you has all the success that you deserve.
Okay, I told you earlier, leadership is about telling you some things you might not want to hear. So I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. Our schools are failing. Our public schools are failing. So we're going to stop lying to you. And some of the schools in these areas are in the bottom 5%. I just counted it up. 28 schools in Oakland are are failing, and 9 in Richmond are failing. Out of 451 schools in California are failing to meet math and English standards. They're in the 6.6% of the students can't meet math standards. 11.8% can't meet English standards. They're failing. We need to make sure that we have qualified K through 12 education. The disparities in marginalized students are being met. That we have students who have wraparound services in all the schools, that we lower the class size to 17 in impacted schools that are impacted by racism and poverty, that we close the language barrier, and that we have adult education, that we teach parents how to support their students. I had 3 students come through this school, and that's because we could afford to send them here. But everybody needs those advantages. But we need to quit fooling ourselves and to keep saying that everybody is getting the same advantages, because they're not.
No, they are not. My mother is a lifelong educator, and the racism in my school when I was in like 1st, 2nd grade was so bad, she pulled me out and went to Black Panther school. So if we're going to talk about achieving, the next level of education, of course we have to fund it, and these brilliant people have suggested all the ways I believe in as well, support to fund it. We also have to get into equity for real, like real talk, because they're saying that in 35 years, African American people are going to have a net worth of $0. And 15 years later, Latinos are going to have a net worth of $0. You're looking at the creation of the next slave class, and it starts in the schools. So we have to fund it, but also tie it to actual equitable distribution of the funds so that the people who are in the highest child poverty rate of the city get the funds they need. And that the teachers, of course, become professionalized, and we pay the best teachers the best amount of money to do this. But we've got to come to brass tacks and look around this room and look at the diversity that's missing here and come to grips with that.
Thank you for that very important question. I, of course, support universal preschool and the proposal to tax millionaires to fund tuition-free college and universities for California residents. But what I focused on most is chronic absenteeism truancy, because in our K through 12, especially elementary schools, you can have all the programs you want, the Berkeley Promise, the Oakland Promise, this program that's going to help low-income students, this program. All these different programs are all very good academically. They're all great programs. They don't mean diddly squat if the child is not in school. That's why when I'm a city council member now, that's why in 2015, I called over to the Oakland Unified School District administration. I said, if I could find money in our city council, in our city hall budget to fund social workers, to work with the families of students who have the highest rates of chronic absenteeism, will you match that and put together a joint partnership between the city and the school district? 2 weeks later, they got back to me and said yes. And we now have social workers working in several elementary schools in Oakland, helping to reduce absenteeism on a family-by-family basis. Tony Thurman wants to work on that statewide. I'm going to join him, and that's going to be my top priority for public education, reducing absenteeism and keeping the kids in school on a family-by-family basis. Thank you.
So I want to take a second to look forward to the future. If you're elected this fall, you'll serve, if you serve out your full term under term limits, you'll be in office for the next 12 years, which means you'll be starting your final term in the year 2029. So looking forward to 2029, what do you think the big issues for California will be at that time, and what do you think your priorities will be going into your last term?
Love this question. Well, hopefully we'll have a basic income by then because we will need one. By 2029, the labor market is going to be radically different. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we know that automation is going to be eating away at jobs. It's already hitting us pretty hard, affecting poor communities and communities of color first and hardest. The effects of climate change will be all the more visible, and we will hopefully be radically far along our path toward a clean energy economy, 100%. We can't stop until we have that vision, until we're leading the nation in 100% clean energy. To make these things happen, we're going to have public financing of elections, because if you don't have a good system, you're not going to have good results. And so we need to be able to not take the control of politics away from rich people. In terms of what are the big issues? We could have, millions of climate refugees in this country alone. We could have, a new economy that hopefully it'll be good news that robots are taking our jobs, because that's labor that we've deemed valuable, and that means we don't have to do it. But we need an economic system that supports that vision, and we need forward-thinking politicians who are going to get us there. Thank you.
Well, I think I'd like to see by 2029, California leading the way in greenhouse reduction and reducing greenhouse. Right now in Richmond, we are leading in that goal. We have more per capita solar panels on our city buildings, and so I'd like to see that every building in California will have solar panels, which of course helps us to reduce our carbon footprint. I also believe that universal income is going to be the wave of the future, because when folks start taking away jobs, we just saw this week about 10 different companies close several stores. Those folks need a job, and if they're not going to provide us with the jobs, then they should pay a tax to help folks be able to afford a living.
Well, my daughter will be 13, so I can assure you I will probably be up at night worried about her and what she's doing. And hopefully we will have just finished 8 years of President Kamala Harris's term. which is something we can all dream for. But my hope for California is that we fix the racial inequities that exist within our education system. When we've addressed these fundamentally and everyone has a fair shot at a good education, that we've addressed the health disparities that exist, and we've led the way in a single payer plan here in California and across and for the country, that we've redefined how we live here in terms of our housing and transportation. You know, and so we're not sitting on the roads for hours every day trying to get places, but we have good public transportation, affordable housing, so everyone can have the access that we need. And of course, we've continued to lead on in terms of what we're doing for the climate and on our environmental policy, and be a model in a lot of ways for the rest of the country, because that's what California does. As California goes, so goes the nation. We have to have a big, bold thinking moving forward, and people that can actually get us there, which is what I think I can do.
After 12 years of service as your representative on the East Bay Mud Board of Directors, fighting to stop a dam and looking for groundwater storage solutions, making sure that we took care of our vulnerable ratepayers to make sure that we would have affordable rates for our low-income customers, and to stop foreclosed properties from having the water shut off on tenants in those buildings. That's the kind of leadership that I'll be able to take to the state capitol and serve for up to 12 years in the state legislature. So what I'd like to see, my vision for California is to have one where we're on track to be protecting our state and our environment, to ensure that we have a clean and safe environment, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, single-payer health care for all, ensuring that we're fixing our state budget to deal with our education system, as well as our social safety net, so that everyone has basic needs met, including housing, health, human services. There's so much to do in California. Please take a look at my website, andykatz.com. Sign up and get involved and find out more. Thanks.
My vision for the future is that there's no wrong side of the tracks. That when you decide to buy your house because you can afford to buy a house, maybe you decide to move from Albany to Richmond because the air there has been cleaned up, and the school there is somewhere where you want to send your child. Or maybe you want to move over there because they built a new medical center there, and because there's such a wealth of patients in that area, and we all have single-payer health care. That's what I envision the end of my term looking like, and I will fight hard to get there. So please join me, the California Nurses Association, Board of Equalization member Fiona Ma, former Assembly member Sandre Swanson, Mayor Genoveva Calloway, and many others as they help me with my campaign. Go to Rochelle8015.com to join. Thank you very much.
So, let me see, 12 years. We won't be walking over homeless people in the street. We'll have equity in schools. We'll have a hospital in Richmond. We'll have a hospital in Berkeley. We'll have K through 12 equity across the board. We'll have no minors in adult prisons. And we'll have 75% reduction in mass incarceration. We'll have none of the people who look like me and my sons afraid of being gunned down in the streets by law enforcement. And we'll have a lot more women of color running this country. Thank you.
In 2031, we will be colonizing Mars. No, but seriously, you know, everything I do in my life, in business, and city council, the legislation, is all centered on creating an equitable future for our people. And this comes from a deeply held personal experience We came here, my family fled slavery to come here. We came barefoot with nothing. And so I'm deeply in tune with the need of the future and to prevent those conditions from ever reappearing. And right now, we are in danger of those conditions reappearing. Out of time. But yeah, so a vision of shared prosperity with equality and opportunity and healthy skies, healthy minds, healthy bodies.
Thank you. I think in my last term, I will still be working on fighting racism. I'll still be working on the third phase or fourth phase of our climate change plan, long-term care, health care if we haven't already got single payer, security in our retirement, job creation because automation hopefully might run rampant. We have a lot of work to do, closing the per pupil spending gap in public education. But it's about getting the things done. And the reason why I'm asking you to support me is because I know that being a state legislator, it's not about glitz and glory and high-profile press releases. It's about good, hard, often behind-the-scenes, tedious work on complex and very important policy matters. And my record shows that that's something I'm very good at. I ask for your support. I'm proud to have the support of City Council Member Peter Moss, who's here, and your own Mayor Peggy McQuaid, who's here, among many other people throughout the East Bay and the state of California. Check out my website, dankolb.net, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
So I'm going to focus on education because for 12 years from now, it is my hope that we will end the academic predictability of the racial predictability of academic achievement in our schools. And that means that our schools will also be safe for every student. It will be safe for students of color. It will be safe for women and girls to have a harassment-free learning environment. It will be safe for our trans students, for our LGBTQ students. It will mean that our students will have access to universal preschool. They'll have access to quality education, to supports in school, to have counselors in school. We'll have career technical education so that students will have opportunities not just to get into a four-year college where they'll be able to go for free, but also that they'll have real opportunities to other jobs, to green jobs, to new economies. And that's what we have to have. We have to have a visionary, we have to have a courageous and visionary idea for what the future of our education is going to look like. And that's what I'm going to bring to this, to the Assembly. That's why the California Teachers Association has supported me, the California Federation of Teachers, Kim Trutain from your own school board, hundreds of other individual community members have supported me because of my vision and my ability and my tenacity and fierceness to get things done. We are the beacon, the lodestar for this state, and this state is a beacon for the nation. And I want to be your leader working with you to bring about that change.
Okay, I'm Bryan Marten, the Vice President of the Albany Democratic Club. Let's have a round of applause for the candidates. I wanted to mention a few things about the club, the Albany Democratic Club that's hosting this. We meet once a month at the first Wednesday of the month in the University Village Community Center at 7 o'clock. We are going to be having an endorsement meeting in March. That's going to be where we will endorse some of these candidates as they prepare for the June primary. We hope you feel better informed. That's one of the things we're trying to do as a club, is to raise awareness of what's going on in the community and the state and beyond. We have future forums coming up planned for the school board and city council, local races in the fall. If you've signed up for our email list in the lobby, you'll be getting notices about those. If you pay dues to become a member, it's $30, then you can vote at the right with enough lead time, like today. You can vote in the endorsement meeting in March. We've had a number of speakers, like the mayor, police chief, community activists, including Together We Will, which has some literature out there for helping with a citizenship class that's coming up to help people become citizens. We've had representatives from Barbara Lee and Tony Thurman, party representatives, to help explain the whole system. We Also wanted to thank for the video production, Nelson Shelley in the back there. Thank you, Nelson. And through his efforts and a lot of the volunteer work that's happened through the club, this will be posted on Albany City's KALB website. And so you can if you missed some of it, you can revisit some of that. The candidates have literature on the table in the lobby, and it is late. If any of them are able to stay, I'm sure they would be happy to speak with you in the lobby, but we need to exit the theater. Thank you so much.